How's it going, everyone? Hope you're doing well. So today I want to do a different kind of top 10. Instead of focusing on recent sets that are kind of getting overwhelming with the frequency, I want to actually go back in time to 1993 and look at Magic's very first set, Alpha. Well, and also Beta, Unlimited, and Revised, but they're more or less the same thing with a few exceptions here and there. So before getting into the honorable mentions, I do want to take a moment to explain my methodology with organizing this list. When assessing these cards for their rank in cube, I'm basing my opinions on four things basically. Pick order, so which cards are the most first pickable in the first pack in a draft. Secondly, the card's vitality in cube archetypes, so how necessary is this card in strategies where it's actually played. Third is uniqueness. How many other cards do what this card does similarly enough that it would be hard to find a suitable replacement? And lastly, fun. Is this card fun to play with or build around? Obviously, taking this all into consideration, these are still only my opinions. It should not be taken as empirical data at all. So as to be expected with a list like this, there's going to be a few caveats. Firstly, I won't be including any of the Power 9 on this list because, well, it would just be a top 2 list at that point. I've also left out Soul Ring and Mana Vault as they kind of fit into the same category as the Power 9, where they're almost always going to be valued higher than most other cards just because of how quickly they accelerate games. I've also left out the dual lands as they're pretty much auto-includes in any cubes they can fit into, and pick order on lands is incredibly subjective with these most of the time anyway. Alright, we're almost there. Before we get into the list, we just have a few honorable mentions. Mind Twist is an incredibly powerful discard spell that pairs amazingly with fast mana and can rip through hands in a hurry. Fast Bond at its worst is acceleration faster than the game typically allows for, and at its best is an incredibly broken engine in a one-sided Armageddon machine. Birds of Paradise is one of the game's very first mana dorks and is still undoubtedly one of the strongest. And Contract from Below, while probably being the single most powerful Magic card ever printed, struggles with not being legal in pretty much every single format-defined cube, and on top of that, being too powerful for a lot of people to really want to include. So with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get into the list. Coming in at number 10 is Dark Ritual. Dark Ritual is an instant for 1 black that creates 3 black mana. The value here really speaks for itself. Dark Ritual is most at home powering Storm decks in Vintage and Legacy cubes, but can also just be used to ramp out large black threats early on. Typically, you're going to be putting yourself in a pretty good position if you're able to get a threat like Phyrexian Obliterator or even Necropotence out on turn 1 or 2. At number 9, I have Wrath of God. Wrath of God's a 4 mana sorcery speed white board wipe, and really the first of its kind. In the years after Wrath of God entered the game, we've seen numerous similar effects with slightly more upside but costing more, or with less versatility but costing less. And until the recent printing of Dam and Modern Horizons 2, this had remained the most efficient board wipe in white. And while Dam is a strictly upgraded version of this, I do think it's still deserving of a spot on this list. Quickly moving on to number 8, we have Armageddon, the bane of casual EDH. Armageddon's another 4 mana white sorcery with 3 words of rule text. Destroy all lands. Armageddon is a mainstay in most Eternal cubes and usually at its best in either aggressive decks that build a board presence and then cast Armageddon to stop slow decks from getting to cast any high CMC spells, or decks that have either high numbers of mana producing artifacts or ways to recur lands from the graveyard easily. Armageddon has got to be one of the worst feeling cards to play against, but one of the most satisfying spells to cast. Coming in at number 7 is Demonic Tutor. Undoubtedly the best card in this category, Demonic Tutor is effectively a second copy of the best card in your deck for any given instance, and can fetch out specific cards as you need them, which is super versatile in a singleton format. Demonic Tutor is most at home in Storm and combo decks in Vintage and Legacy Cube, although it's rarely a bad card to pick up from most any deck playing black. Taking the number 6 spot on this list is the original Counterspell. While not being the best available counterspell in a lot of higher power cubes, It is still in the higher tier of permission spells in my opinion, and it's hard to argue against the iconicness of original counterspell. Slotting into control archetypes, running the power level gambit from Pauper all the way through power cubes, counterspell is a staple in nearly every cube. At number 5, I've placed Balance. Balance is a 2-mana white sorcery that essentially reads if either player has more cards in hand, creatures in play, and lands in play than the other player. The player who has more of any of those sacrifices down until both players have the same number of cards in hand, lands in play, and creatures on the battlefield. It literally balances the game. Or it's supposed to anyway. The real way to use this card is to build your deck in a way where you always come out ahead. Load up on mana producing artifacts so you can afford to be slightly behind on lands, especially if your opponent has used any land-based ramp. Hold out on building a board state before casting this so you don't lose any valuable creatures. And the kinds of decks that generally play Balance, white decks, don't have nearly as many ways to refill their hands as most other colors in Cube. So provided we've made a few plays before casting Balance, we'll usually come out ahead there. I feel like I just super over-explained that, but whatever. So the number 4 spot on this list is to this day one of the best spells in its category, and I can see the argument for it being the best non-power card from this set, solely based on how iconic it's become, and that is Lightning Bolt. 1 mana for 3 damage to anything in red is as clean and straightforward as it gets, and to date is still the very best burn spell we've ever seen printed. Unless you're playing either a color restricted or like a block based cube, I genuinely don't believe there's a reason for Bolt to not be in every cube. Breaking into the top 3, the first card we're looking at is going to be Wheel of Fortune. I actually considered not including Wheel of Fortune on this list because the price of this card and it being on the reserve list makes it pretty inaccessible to a large portion of players, but honestly this card is too good to leave out. Also, just proxy everything. Honestly, just do it. Nobody's gonna stop you, just proxy shit. You don't need to take out a bank loan to play a children's card game. Anyway, exorbitant prices aside, Wheel is one of the very best draw 7s in the game and is a must include if you plan to support Storm in your cube. Aside from that, sometimes in an aggressive like mono red deck, you unload your hand early on and just need a way to refill it, which this does an exceptional job at. So the second place spot on this list is taken by the best single target piece of removal the game has ever seen, with Swords to Plowshares. For 1 white mana, you get to exile any creature and have its controller gain life equal to that creature's power. It's clean, it's cheap, it's unconditional, and in my opinion, the single best white card in the game. And early into a draft, this can absolutely sway me to play white. So I had a really hard time picking a number 1 spot for this list, but finally landed on Channel for my pick for the best card in Cube from Alpha. Channel is a 2 mana green sorcery that basically lets you trade 1 life for 1 colorless mana any number of times until the end of turn. When this card first debuted, it wasn't considered very good as there weren't a ton of great colorless payoffs for it, but in Cube we have access to some of the game's most powerful creatures and artifacts. I've won a lot of games on turn 1 from casting Channel into Emrakul, and it's honestly one of the best feeling things to pull off in Cube, despite potentially being a little bit of a glass cannon. And while I don't know that there is an objectively best card from this set, aside from obviously power, Channel is absolutely my favorite to draft with. So that is my top 10 picks for best Cube inclusions from Alpha. I'm sure there'll be a ton of conflicting opinions about some of these, and I'd love to see your lists in the comments. And if you liked this video and want to see more top 10s on older, kind of iconic sets, please let me know in the comments. That is all I've got for right now. Thanks so much for watching.